Techlandia is recorded at the Central Office on the East Side in Portland. Central Office is a one stop for all your office or meeting needs. Check them out at centraloffice.com. Welcome to Techlandia, a podcast about and for the technology industry, a place to learn, connect, and engage with leaders and thinkers involved in the technology industry. You can check us out at techoregon.org, Apple, Spotify, or wherever you listen. Thank you for listening and enjoy the show.
Welcome, everyone, to our latest episode of Techlandia, TAO's podcast series. I'm Skip Newberry, President and CEO, and we're pleased to have with us Chris and Randy from EmpathiHR. Chris and Randy, welcome.
Hey, Skip. Thank you.
Excellent. Well, I always love to kick these off by learning a little bit about your respective professional journeys and a little bit about the company and how it got started. So let's start with Chris. Can you share a little bit about how you ended up at EmpathiHR? What were you up to prior to?
Sure. So my story is a little bit, I think, unique in that I'm doing exactly what I said I was never going to do. I came out of high school, went to college, joined the Marine Corps, ended up deploying a few times. And when my service was up, my contract expired, wasn't quite sure what I was going to do. And my dad had owned in various HR companies over the years. And he said, why don't you come work for me for a little bit until you figure out, what you want to do. And, fast forward, that's been 18 years now since that conversation. And, he decided he was going to retire, and I brought on some partners and bought him out. And that's, where Randy comes into the picture, and we've got another partner, Carter. And we decided that we were going to approach, HR from a little bit different angle with a focus on the affirmative defense and how we can help employers as the risks to employers are increasing these days. Bring to market an effective risk mitigation solution.
Excellent. And Randy, how about you?
So my background was in technology. So I had a business intelligence consulting firm in Dallas with a couple other partners and had about 118 software architects working for us. We had quite a client base: American Airlines, Neiman Marcus, Pizza Hut, Fannie Mae, Texas Instruments, Nokia, Zales, Procter & Gamble, a bunch of big clients. And we build technology solutions, and $1 billion company came along and bought us out, and we retired about 10 years ago. And since I've been investing. And Chris, when I met him, I've known him for years, but when we got talking about him buying out his dad and going in this new direction, the vision he had really was tied around a lot of the legal changes, and the legal landscape has really changed in the last couple of years, so that the power dynamic, where it used to be employers held all the power, it's really shifted so that employees now have a lot of power, and where employers thought they were protected or covered, that no longer exists. And that's been because of these legal changes. So Chris's vision was, how do we protect a company? And what could we be doing? That was one of the things they've been doing for about 20 years. They built something called the affirmative defense. It's based on two legal doctrines from Supreme Court cases. And they had partnered with a legal firm out of Houston, Texas. And with the firm, they, on behalf of their clients, had responded to over 1,000 EEOC charges, and they had never had, or have yet to have, had the EEOC taken adverse action against a client. So basically, they've never lost. And so Chris said, why don't we take this from a service offering and make this into a software as a service offering so we can scale it wider and bring the price down? And so he came to me and Carter, our other business partner, and he wanted to build a custom platform to do this, so that it became a software as a service offering. And so that's how the conversation started. And it was something Carter and I put a team together, built out the platform, and with Chris's direction, he had the domain expertise, we were able to build out EmpathiHR. And so that's what I do now, is basically invest in different companies. And this is one of the ones we're most excited about.
Excellent. I was wondering if one of you could walk us through EmpathiHR services and just explain a little bit about how you're working with businesses to proactively, prevent workplace issues before they escalate.
Sure. So our whole reason for existence is to help employers mitigate risk. We like to say what we bring to the table allows employers to be able to demonstrate that they've done everything that can be reasonably expected of them to prevent and stop harassment, discrimination, and other forms of workplace misconduct in the workplace. And so we kind of have a multi-pronged approach to how we do this, but it's through effective policies and clear communication of those policies. It's reinforcing those policies through effective training for both your employers or your employees and your managers, ensuring everybody's receiving the training, is being tested on it so that we can, again, demonstrate employees understood what is and is not acceptable in the workplace. We proactively engage with employees to learn of issues. The whole point is to be able to recognize or learn of issues before they grow into bigger issues, increasing your exposure to liability. On top of that, we have, a standard employee hotline that your employees can engage with, whether it's on the phone, email, text message, so that if they have a question, if they have a concern, they're able to engage with an expert that's at least going to be able to answer their questions, if not intake a complaint. And then through that service, we engage immediately with the employee or the complainant to begin our investigation if necessary. And then we manage that investigation with oversight of the employer to come to a conclusion, and then provide the employer with a summary, our findings through the investigation, a recommendation based off of best business practice on how to best resolve the matter outlined in the complaint, so that they're able to resolve the employee's issue, hopefully, and protect themselves at the same time. And we do that through, we leverage a smartphone app, a web app that conducts the interviews remotely, but on video. And this has been a tremendous change and successful for us in that employees often, when they're making a complaint or when they're engaged in a investigation, may feel intimidated or may be of sensitive nature, and they're able to do these interviews and respond in a place that they're comfortable from. And we found that the integrity of our investigations have been greatly improved. And through this, again, we are checking a lot of boxes and doing a lot of things on behalf of a company, again, to be able to demonstrate to whatever enforcement agency, whether it's the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission or a state enforcement agency, that the company has done everything that you could reasonably expect of them to stop and prevent workplace misconduct from occurring.
And one other feature that we have that is kind of unique is that we do something called the quarterly questionnaire. So 4 times a year, we reach out proactively to every employee and ask them a series of questions. Fundamentally, it's, have you been a victim of or witness to? And then there's a series that they ask. But the key there is to reset the clock every 90 days. So that it's to help protect employers and also to find out if there's a problem so it can be addressed. And by resetting that clock, it's really allowing that foundation to be put in place for the affirmative defense to make sure that, because the different states have different rules, but it can be up to 365 days now that someone has time to make a complaint. So you want to make sure you're addressing something proactively. You find out what's going on. It's like if you go to the doctor, you'd rather find out you've got a problem early on when you can deal with it than wait till you've actually now got a major litigation issue or that a major health issue. So the quarterly questionnaire has been a big benefit to our clients and to the employees as well.
That's fantastic. So it's more about kind of taking proactive measures through your kind of tech focused platform, right? And so you're able to introduce some automations in there that I would imagine are probably pretty attractive to some of the client companies that you work with, because it can be a relatively time intensive process to proactively reach out to employees on a regular basis and check in. And I'm wondering, how would you characterize the landscape? Are most businesses kind of caught flat-footed in a reactive mode just because they often lack the infrastructure to be able to be proactive?
Absolutely. It's unfortunately, this is an area of HR that oftentimes doesn't get the attention that it should, frankly. HR's plate is full. They've got so much that they're dealing with. with, payroll, benefits, 401ks, leave management. They're just inundated with day-to-day stuff. And to be able to further manage training your employees, proactively engaging with them, intaking complaints, and being able to effectively handle those complaints. You've got to disengage with what you're focused on each day to now engage with an employee and manage that issue. And oftentimes that the effort can be lacking, or there could be fault found in the handling of an investigation, simply because HR can be inundated with so many other things and tasks. Oftentimes, companies don't have training, or didn't ensure everybody completed their training, or they're just doing live training. There's a lot of issues there. And when we're able to bring this solution into a company and able to easily integrate it into their processes, it quickly improves the engagement with the employees, and they're able to achieve this level where they can effectively assert their affirmative defense should there be an issue down the road.
And just to add on a great example, because this is a really good question, Skip. Most companies think they're protected. Most companies actually are not aware of the law changes. So right away, they are caught flat-footed. They are not aware of the exposure that they have and the financial recourse that can happen, which can happen on multiple levels, which we can talk about in a second. But the example I want to give you is a couple of years ago in Texas, there was a case against FedEx, and it was one woman, a case of retaliation. And it was actually not through the EOC, it's through actually the public courts. And through a jury trial, they found that FedEx was at fault, and the award out of it was $366 million for one case of retaliation. Yeah, it's staggering what happened. But what was really interesting with FedEx, when you look at the ruling and what the judge had decided, because they were large. I mean, FedEx is a great company. It's big. It's got a lot of structure. So nothing against FedEx, but they thought that they were okay. But the judge determined in the ruling that there was a poor investigation process and documentation, that they didn't have right HR personnel conducting the investigation. And so there was just things that a company that thought they were protected, thought they were doing things right. And then the judge said, no, you're not. And that really caught them blindsided. Now, for full disclosure, they fought it for a couple of years, and they've actually brought the judgment down. So that was not, they brought it down to a much lower level. However, there was still reputational damage that was done that they didn't want to have to deal with in nowadays, where it's hard to hire people, right, and retain them. You don't want to have an issue out in the public domain that says that you have an issue with retaliation or whatever it is at your company, because that can hurt retaining great employees or trying to bring new employees on. So those are the kind of things that you said. There are a lot of companies just not even aware of what their exposure is, and they think they're doing okay, and they're not until they suddenly have these huge financial problems and legal situations in front of them.
Yep. Yeah, and I think too, we've talked a little bit so far about some of the challenges that the HR function faces, and that it can be overwhelming given all the things they need to focus on from a time and attention standpoint. And with the legal landscape changing rapidly, state by state, federal regulations, et cetera, what are some of the biggest challenges or issue areas that are facing employers today?
Well, Skip, like you just mentioned, it's the legislative changes. It's the judicial decisions. For example, just recently, this month, the state of Illinois, they have their own state laws overseeing harassment, discrimination, and they've amended it, or passed 3 amendments to that law, increasing the burden on employers. So now every employer that operates in Illinois has to go in and update their handbook, update their training to include these changes. And then on the judicial side, how the courts are interpreting the law and deciding on cases, it's very rare that a single use of a racial slur is going to establish or create a racially hostile work environment. However, just recently in the state of California, the California Supreme Court found that a non-supervisor employee using a single racial slur one time established a racially hostile work environment and found the company liable. So we're seeing a trend, not only legislatively, we're seeing it judicially, and then at the enforcement agency level, both the state and federal, they're predominantly very employee or pro-employee, I should say. And so we're seeing the enforcement guidance that's coming out that is making it more and more difficult for employers. And then we've got to deal with just a societal or cultural change. Employees are much more educated these days. They understand what their rights are far more than employees did a mere 5 or 10 years ago. So companies have to be aware of this and be able to kind of change with the times, or at least be taking steps to mitigate those risks with the changes as they're happening.
And there are some very large changes too legally. Like in 2022, there's the Arbitration Amendment Act, and the Speak Out Act came out later that fall. But under the Arbitration Amendment Act of 2022, they removed pre-dispute arbitration clauses for the case of sexual assault and sexual harassment. And so that meant that they were no longer void. And that's a use that you'd be forced to go through arbitration if there was a problem with your employee. And it's around a little around 60% of companies have
63%.
have a clause like that in their, or had a clause like that in their employment agreements to help protect companies so that they could not just go right to an EEOC or external trial, have to fix it through administrative remedies. Well, that was removed in those two cases for sexual assault and sexual harassment. And then the Speak Out Act later that year removed it. So if you had an NDA, for example, if there had been a problem, then you had someone sign an NDA and take money to be quiet. That was not something that could be enforced for sexual assault or sexual harassment. A lot of employers are just not aware of those kind of changes, or that there was a memorandum of understanding a little over a year ago that came out between the EEOC and the Department of Labor, where if one of the organizations start to investigate a company, they now share their findings with their counterpart. So that could expose you to being approached by two different groups and having two different investigations going on. So there's been a lot of changes that increase that exposure that companies, most are just not aware of that's happening to them. And these other specific, and there's federal, so it goes across the country. Then there's some states that have their own ruling. So there's so many changes happening so quickly that unless you're up to date on it, like, for example, in Texas, the standard used to be, did you know that something was going on? And that was the standard that was adhered to. And it's now been changed in Texas. Should you have known, which is a very broad, very nebulous term trying to define and understanding, should I have known that? And they've actually litigated that already and proved it out. So there's these changes that unless you're aware of them, your exposure has been dramatically increased.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And just to add one more point to that, sorry to cut you off, Skip. One of the, I think probably the biggest issue is companies thinking it's not an issue. Oh, we're a small family business, or we've got everything under control. We're doing all these things. We don't have those types of issues here. A 2023 study came out and showed that roughly 75% of all employees either reported being a witness to or a victim of some form of workplace misconduct. So it's not something that is occasional or it's rare. We wouldn't need to exist if that was the case. The fact is, we're human, we're fallible, we make mistakes. People have bad days, and things are said and done that unfortunately shouldn't have been said or done. So it is an issue, and people just need to be aware that it is actually happening. And head in the sand stance is not going to bode well for you when something does.
Yeah, there's another study in 2023 that showed there's about 2.6 billion in lost productivity due to workplace misconduct. So this is becoming a very big issue that's widespread, as Chris just mentioned, and it's not going away. So that's part of the thing that, again, if people are thinking, oh, it's not that big of a deal, whether you're a big company or a little company, people are people and it happens. And so the question you need to be asking yourself, have you done everything to protect yourself to make sure you mitigated your exposure? And that a lot of people are just not asking the right questions right now. And they find out too late when they've now been served and they're having to deal with a problem with the EEOC or a public court issue.
That's an important point too, that you mentioned earlier about, it's not just huge companies that have to deal with these issues, but increasingly small businesses, medium-sized businesses. And, they're often, they don't have the same type of infrastructure as some of the very largest companies when it comes to being able to rely on an internal legal department or compliance team, et cetera. And are you seeing quite a bit of interest in what you all are doing among the SMB market in particular?
Absolutely. That is while we've got clients ranging from, as few as 10 into the multi thousands, the SMB market is very successful for us simply because, like you just mentioned, Skip, they don't have the teams, they don't have the infrastructure in place. You've got, single individuals wearing multiple hats typically. And for them to be able to efficiently offload some of these duties and for us to manage this process for them is a huge burden off of their back, especially. But even at the larger size businesses, we're having great success with them simply because we are a time saving for their HR. They're able to outsource part of this and trust that it's being handled effectively for them. For just one client last year, we estimated we saved their HR department roughly about 83 hours, man hours, dealing with workplace investigations.
83 days.
I'm sorry, 83 days. Yeah.
I was going to say 83 days would be impressive too,
Yeah.
but 83 hours, but 83 days, that's pretty significant.
It was 83 days and just around $2.9 million of what would have been legal fines. And if we had not been able to go and address those problems, if they had gone to court and just on an average settlement basis, if they not even going to full outside litigation, in which case it would have been over $10 million. So that's a great question, Skip, though, because reputationally, you don't want your name in the mud. Everything goes public, whether it's Glassdoor, Google reviews, X, Reddit, whatever. It's going to be published and people are going to find out if you have a problem. And that can hurt you financially in a lot of ways. If you're a big company, it can hurt your stock price. It can hurt your ability to raise capital. It can hurt as an executive. It can affect your bonus. So there's big companies are exposed and they don't want to write those checks because they can be big. But when you ask about the smaller market, there's the obvious issue. If you go and have to deal with the EOC, and those litigations can range anywhere from 50,000 to $1 million plus to a couple $1 million. So there's those going to hit your bottom line. But there's other variables too, like your EPLI insurance and others. We have a client, they're on the West Coast client insurance. There was a sexual charge against the client. And at the end of the day, when they got their premium back, they used their EPLI insurance to try to cover it. But it went up. There was I think the deductible was 15,000 and it 10x'd. So that their deductible went up to $150,000, which when you're a small company, you have to use that again. That's right out of your bottom line. And that has a major effect on your bottom line. And that's what you don't want. You don't want that cost. And so it is a big deal that has real teeth. It's not one of these, it's a $500 fine that goes away. These are tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of dollars. And that's if it doesn't go out in the public domain, because who knows what kind of damage it can happen to you reputationally wise, trying to hire or fire, or just being a client, depending on, if you're dealing with companies and the client you serve and you're a vendor to has a corporate scorecard, that can affect your rating and the ability to keep that company as a client as well, because those things are being filtered down. So everyone has to adhere now to these new standards.
Right. And so we've talked a little bit about, how EmpathiHR's platform essentially helps with surveying employees proactively. In terms of some of the legal compliance in the information and alerts, how does that portion work when you're working with, say, an HR team?
So as changes are made, for example, earlier I mentioned the changes that are happening in Illinois. So our clients in Illinois are going to be notified of these changes, and then we're going to go about updating our content to ensure that it's updated in time. I believe two of them, the amendments go into effect January 1 of 25. The third one is January 1 of 26. So we'll update our content and we will ensure that it's all pushed out and that all employees have completed those trainings and updates to policies prior to that deadline, so that, again, those companies can say, we've done it, we're in compliance with the state law here, and all of our employees are aware of it. They've acknowledged those policies and they've been trained on it as well. So as those changes occur, whether it's at the federal level or the state level, we're monitoring that. We're going to engage with the client, make sure that they understand those changes, work with them if it requires policy changes. And then internally, we're obviously updating our content as well.
Mhm. That's great. And in terms of, both internal investigations, training, et cetera, you know, companies of all sizes really should be thinking about effective risk mitigation strategies, right? So in terms of empathy HR, you could do something that's, you know, more comprehensive for a business that lacks a lot of real infrastructure or capabilities internally, or for a much larger business, to your point earlier, you might be a key addition to their existing teams. And I'm wondering if you could spend a little bit of time talking about how, from essentially a pricing or a value proposition standpoint, like what's the thing that really causes an SMB business to say, yes, we're going to work with empathy HR versus say a larger business, or is it the same? I was wondering if you could walk us through that in terms of what are some of the common first points of engagement that you're seeing across your customer base.
So, I mean, as far as pricing, we like to say, we cost a little bit less than, a decent cup of coffee per employee per month. We're far cheaper than, bringing on an HR staff or even a seasoned HR professional to handle this. Frankly, in this space, we're more effective. So it's not a huge hit to a company's budget when they're looking at bringing on a solution like this.
Yeah, and the big value proposition is kind of interesting. It's for both sides. In the world that we're in right now, there's a lot of exposure. And the challenge, it doesn't matter the size of your company. What you don't want to have to do, there's the direct financial hit. So it could be $1 million lawsuit, could be 100,000, could be whatever. Nobody wants to write that check. Nobody wants to have the reputational damage. That's the second big thing, whether you're big or small, out in the public domain. And then you want to protect your company culture and your employee morale. Because if you have a problem and you're not dealing with it, so for example, we had a client, young lady was promoted. She was hit on by her new boss. And what ended up happening was she actually made a complaint to HR. Nothing happened immediately, or wasn't dealt with. And she complained to the guy's manager. Nothing happened. And then she ended up getting demoted because she rebuffed the guy. And what happened was we just happened to be doing the quarterly questionnaire at the time, and she responded to it. And within 48 hours, we had fully investigated everybody that was involved, herself, the person she complained against, and about 9 other witnesses. And what we were able to do within those 2 days is come back with a 15-page summary with all the video links and our industry best practices recommendation. And what we were able to determine was this fellow had not only done it to her, he was doing it to a couple other people, and they'd already lost 2 other good employees that left in the recent previous year. And so they had some serious exposure. So our recommendation was that he was fired for cause, which they did, and they protected themselves. They brought her back up and gave her the back pay and promoted her back to where she was. And so they took care of that problem and then did not have further litigation issues. And the really great outcome of that was they followed that group for the next 3 or 4 quarters, and the work productivity went up because that problem, didn't cost them a bunch of litigation fees because they dealt with it, but they also saw the productivity of the group go up. And that's a big deal. And that's where the exposure that you have, because it's on all levels, you want to mitigate that as much as possible. The other thing as well, whether you're a large company or small company, everybody's busy. And because we built this as a software as a service offering, and you kind of asked this earlier, Skip, is everything's automated. Once we tie in and get the feed of all the people that we're putting in the system, our system takes care of everything, all the notifications, all the training, all the updates. Managers have access to everything they need. If we have a separate tracking system for case management, when there is an investigation, they have full access to, but our team takes care of everything, and our system is fully automated. So the amount of effort on a client, regardless of the size, is minimal. And we can fully integrate to an existing system with single sign-on, or we can be standalone, whatever fits the client's needs. So that ease of use and that low impact to their infrastructure load is also a big benefit when you look at the amount of mitigation and the savings that we provide, that low cost.
That's great. That's great. I mean, I just locked in on one point you made, which I think is often overlooked in terms of value by companies, which is many of the firms we work with in Oregon are often saying, they struggle with employee engagement in hybrid or fully remote environments. It can be sometimes tough. And And you need that kind of proactive outreach in a way where you're saying, hey, look, we care about your experience here. How's it going? Are there any issues? But the thing you said earlier was so important, which is companies often end up not being able to spot elements of toxicity in the workplace, and that can have dramatic impacts on productivity and overall morale. And if you can kind of excise those by identifying them quickly and addressing them, that's huge.
Huge.
Well,
That
it's huge from a risk mitigation standpoint. It's huge in developing or further developing the trust with your employees of, hey, I brought to your attention this issue and you addressed it. And, it becomes where your mission statement or your value statement aren't just words. You're actually acting it out and proving it out to your employees. And when you do that, your retention levels are going to improve because it's a better place to work. The quality of employee that you attract is going to be higher. So it's not just the risk mitigation and the financial side worrying about enforcement agencies, but it's how are you able to operate your business and engage with your employees moving forward.
Yeah, retention of great employees has never been more important, at least in the last 20 years. And so you want to make sure that you have that, you're maintaining the culture that you've built and that you're making it a place they want to work, especially as you said, Skip, when you have this now a blend of hybrid, on-site and remote worker as well, which makes it that much harder. And so the more that you can do to facilitate that and keep the people that are keeping your company going, because fundamentally your people are your company, that's a big deal. It's really important. And that's a big value portion of what Empathy HR brings to the table.
Excellent. So looking ahead, what are you most excited about as a company?
I think for us right now, it's just the growth path that we're on. We're able right now, we're being introduced and meeting a lot of great companies, both in the SMB market and larger companies, and just the relationships that we're developing and the solution that we're bringing to the table for them. It's nice to do something that matters, that we're protecting companies, but we're also protecting employees and doing something that we believe is making a difference for a number of companies.
Awesome. Couldn't hope for much more than that, right?
I mean, at the end of the day, you want to have purpose, and I feel like what we're doing here matters, and we're having a positive impact.
Well, no, and just to dovetail what Chris is saying, it's meeting these great clients, and we've now developed a number of partnerships like yourself with Technology Oregon, or if you look at, we have a number of law firms, large firms we're dealing with, and insurance companies as well, that this has become a real problem for their clients. And so we're partnering with them and some payroll companies and a few others, and they're actually bringing us to their clients as a solution to help solve the problems that they're seeing that they're having to address internally, and they don't have that fit to address it. So they're bringing us in as that strategic partner to make it. And that to us was a huge validation of what we're doing as we see this growth and these strategic partnerships just continue to flourish and get obviously we grow with so much bigger exposure, but it's a real problem that has not been addressed very well up to now. And so that is exciting, as Chris said, to know that, hey, this does make a difference. And it's not just us. We're seeing this across the board with these strategic partnerships in multiple verticals. So that's been really exciting.
That's excellent. We're excited about the partnership that you all have with us and making your services available to our members. And I just want to let our listeners know that they can, find out more at techoregon.org. And want to thank you both for taking some time out of your busy schedules to join us today. We appreciate it. And yeah, thanks again.
Thank you.
It is our pleasure. Thank you very much for having us.
Yeah, thank you. We are glad to be partners and appreciate your time.